The details of how the Mahaguru collected the disciples of his past. A story of patience, coordination, and amalgamation. Collection Center. People often ask me how a powerful entity like Gurudev chose his disciples. Strange but true, most of the people he picked looked unqualified for the job, including moi. There was nothing seemingly spiritual about our appearance, mannerisms, gait, or behavior. We came from all walks of life with varied educational and social backgrounds, and many like me did not know how to even spell spiritualism. While some were religiously inclined, many of us were not. When I reflected back on a vision that I had decades ago, the riddle solved itself. I saw Gurudev resting on a platform, suspended in the sky, with 5 or 6 of us in attendance. We were witnesses to hundreds of bald monks dressed in cream-colored togas, descending to earth on an invisible escalator. I intuitively sensed that they were going to be part of a joint spiritual mission of personal development as well as changing the ethos of millions on this planet. These entities would take birth wherever they could find a womb and connect at different stages of life with the Mahaguru. But before that, Gurudev had to rise to his preordained stature of the Mahaguru, then hunt all these entities down through some coincidence or the other and draw them back into his spiritual fold. His future disciples would show up at his door by hook or by crook. Some would come knocking, looking for cures for themselves or their family members, while others would come seeking help of a different kind. After reconnecting, Gurudev would inspire them to get involved and entice them towards the subject of spirituality. Due to their past connections, he could rebuild their faith, leading to their acceptance of him as their guru. Then engage them in practices of self-development and later give them powers and accompanying symbols needed for seva. If it sounds cumbersome, it certainly was. Punchu Sethi, a stellar devotee, offers a profound viewpoint. Having known Gurudev since her teenage days, she felt a sense of ownership over him.
A guru comes according to the need of the youth. Like Guru Gobind Singh Ji's time, a warrior guru was needed for the Hindus. So Guru Gobind Singh Ji came. Now in these times when spiritualism is already being talked about in bad context, Guruji came. He was a normal man. He was a soil service scientist working for the government of India. He was the ultimate householder. His children was happy. His wife was happy. And then he did seva and made hundreds of people happy and content.
I'm going to enjoy disagreeing with Punchu in absentia. I believe his life and times were purely a role play. And yes, she is right. A guru comes with an agenda and not just for a walk in the park. His was upliftment of people and completion of his disciples. His life became a lesson that will attract millions over the decades and centuries to come, helping people to re-establish a connection with their spiritual selves can be considered his main mission. And now Ravi Trehanji, a disciple, has this to add.
What was the purpose then of his coming, getting the Om, doing so much seva, so many disciples? It was just an evolutionary process?
Yes, Guruji had very clearly shared with me very long back कि बेटा मुझे जन्म लेने की क्या जरूरत थी, लेकिन मैंने जो परिवार सहेड़ा, आई एम यूजिंग हिज वर्ड्स नाउ, ये परिवार जो मैंने सहेड़ लिया था, जब तक इनका भी कल्याण नहीं हो जाता तो गुरु का कल्याण नहीं होता। तो मुझे फिर जन्म लेना पड़ा तुम लोगों को फिर इकट्ठा करने के लिए, जिस स्टेज पे तुमको पिछले जन्म में छोड़ा था उससे और ऊपर उठाने के लिए। तो ये गुरु टेक्स अपॉन हिमसेल्फ द रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी कि जब वो अपने कुछ बच्चों को वर लेता है, वर लेने का मतलब है दे बिकम हिज रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी। जब तक उनका उत्थान नहीं होता, जब तक उनका कल्याण नहीं होता, गुरु भी आगे नहीं बढ़ सकता। He cannot leave them, he cannot desert them on the way and go.
Is it that he has a certain number of disciples? Because there were so many hundreds of them. Or are you talking about all of them being part of that?
Disciples hundreds में तो नहीं थे. There is a different category of followers.
Okay.
सेवादार, followers और शिष्यास. अब शिष्या के बाद he had number of times explained कि इतने लोग जो बढ़ गए हैं, बेटा वो मेरे शिष्य नहीं है, वो आपके शिष्य हैं. So there is a hierarchy.
Disciples were those who had exhausted the journey of being followers and devotees and were now ready for complete surrender to their guru. Their loyalty, their gunas, and their obedience went a long way in qualifying them for the post. What was cute was whoever met Gurudev a few times and developed faith in him took it for granted that he or she was his shishya. He never disappointed them by pointing out that it was technically inaccurate and that they were his followers and not his disciples. In fact, it was very common to hear Gurudev say, "Tu aa gaya hai?" which means, "So you've arrived?" when he first met many of us. At the time, these sounded like a set of casually spoken words until later we would discover what they truly meant. Many of Gurudev's disciples who came into the spiritual fold in phase 2 got connected to his disciples as their disciples. That is how the orchard to be started, as a solitary tree. I have witnessed 3 generations of his disciples take initiation in a most informal manner. We have almost reached 50 years of seva at the time of this recording, and I hope we will last another 50 years or more through these spiritual downlines. Ravi Trehanji is back to sharing interesting anecdotes about his past life connection with Gurudev and some others, including Gurudev's first disciple, Malhotra ji.
Once I had insistently asked him, Guruji, this relationship of a shishya and a guru cannot be of one birth. We must have spent many births together, and the present birth is a continuation of what has been done in the past. But I want to know what exactly has been my relationship with you in the previous birth. So he said, बेटा अगर मैंने आपको ऐसे अपनी जुबान से बता दिया तो तुमको वो मजा नहीं आएगा. ये महागुरु मंत्र का पाठ करते करते रात को सो जाना, फिर देखना क्या तमाशा, क्या नजारा नजर आता है. मैंने पाठ करता करता I switched off and I felt I was transported some 150, 160, 170 years back, जहाँ हम लोग पिछले जन्म में रहते थे. And Guruji also used to come and stay there for about 4, 5, 6 months in a year. एंड बहुत बड़ी हवेली थी हमारी, 23-24 कमरों की बहुत बड़ी हवेली, और उसमें कुछ हमारे जो प्रेजेंट गुरु भाई हैं, दे ऑल्सो यूज्ड टू विजिट ऑफ एंड ऑन दैट प्लेस. सो दैट वाज वन इंडिकेशन ही गेव मी. देन लेटर मैंने फिर सवाल किया, मैंने गुरुजी ये तो हो गया, एक ग्लिम्स आपने मुझे दिखा दी कि हम पिछली लाइफ में कहाँ थे, किस जगह थे. एंड वेरी स्पेसिफिक ही वाज. वो जगह का मैंने स्केच बना के नेक्स्ट डे उनको जाके दिखाया. ही आइडेंटिफाइड, ही सेड कि यस दिस प्लेस इज इन शाहजहांपुर इन यूपी. और वो छोटी ईंट की इमारत थी. सच बिल्डिंग्स यू कैन स्टिल सी इन प्लेसेस लाइक हरिद्वार और ओल्ड सिटीज. स्मॉल ब्रिक की जो कंस्ट्रक्शन होती है. Then I said, Guruji, this is one glimpse. Of course, you showed me that our relationship has been continuing. But then ये जो साधना हम लोग कर रहे हैं, जो गुरु शिष्य का रिलेशनशिप है, उसके बारे में तो कोई आपने खास उसमें लाइट नहीं थ्रो की. बोले बेटा मैं वहाँ, तुमने देखा कि मैं वहाँ आया करता था, 3-3, 4-4, 5-5, 6-6 महीने वहाँ रहा करता था, तुम लोगों से पाठ करवाया करता था. ऐसे नहीं है, मुझे बहुत क्लैरिटी नहीं मिली है. Then he said, all right, नेक्स्ट डे तुम फिर बैठो, कोशिश करो ध्यान में बैठने की. And I was again transported some maybe about 200 years back. That was a place somewhere in Himachal, or in the mountains. पगडंडी होती है जो पहाड़ों में, उसके maybe 10 feet higher मचान के दो तरफ दो गुफाएं थी, 2 caves. On the opposite side again there were 2 caves. I could precisely identify, I saw myself. I was an old man of about 125, 26 years old with a long white beard. I could identify my mrikshala. I could identify my blanket. And it was so clear, black and white, square का blanket था. Then वो जो महात्मा लोग लकड़ी का सहारा लेके बाजू रखते हैं, I could identify that also. I could identify my kalmanda, जिसमें हम लोग खाना वाना डाल के खाया करते थे. And I clearly saw कि जो next door की cave है, वो गुरुजी की अपनी cave थी. And the one opposite my cave was Malhotra Papaji's cave. So he showed me कि भी पिछले से पिछले जन्म में हमने कितनी तपस्या की थी इकट्ठे बैठ के. So all this thing was giving me an indication कि बेटा it's a continuation.
And what about this Shahjahanpur house? Did you go and check it out?
In fact, Malhotra Papaji had gone. He had gone. He identified. मैंने उनको sketch बना के दिया था. Then we discussed with Guruji also. So he was more inquisitive. He went to Shahjahanpur. So he said the only difference is what you described, वो आंगन उस वक्त कच्चा था, मट्टी का था, अभी वो cemented है. But otherwise the same construction what you have indicated, वो छोटी ईंट का वो हवेली बनी हुई थी.
One person among many whom Gurudev disclosed his past life to was Puranji. Gurudev told him that he had been acquainted with him twice in his past lives. Once in Ujjain and around 500 years ago during the time of Guru Nanak. Do listen on. So did he tell you about any of your past lives or any acquaintanceship that you might have had with him?
No. इतना बड़ा दो बार बताया. एक उज्जैन में था, एक सेवा करते थे, एंड पंजाब में थे गुरु नानक देव उस टाइम सेवा करते थे, तब और कोई नहीं पता.
So he said that you had spent 2 lifetimes of interaction.
Which I know, which he told me. That's बाकी नहीं पता मेरे को.
Gurudev gave me an indication of my past life, which certainly helped me understand the correlation of my past with the present. He told me that I was a saintly man, and even today, people still come and bow their heads at my last life's ashram. At the time he told me this, I found it hard to fathom. Today I can see the merger of life that with life this. Giri Lalwani voices a common sentiment.
We all had gone to Bangalore to attend Dr. Shankar Narayan's daughter's marriage. So from there he said, let's go to Mysore and then Ooty. On the way we came across a place called Bandipur. Bandipur, there is a forest. He said, let's halt there. So next day morning he was having a walk in the morning near pond. So I went down to meet him. Then he said कि बेटा तेरा मेरा जो रिश्ता है ना, ये जन्मों जन्मों से रिश्ता है, ये कोई इस जन्म का नहीं है ना. सिर्फ तेरा मेरा रिश्ता जन्मों जन्मों से, जितने मेरे तुम बच्चे हो उसमें जितने भी हैं सारे मेरे डिसाइपल्स हैं, चाहे वो मल्होत्रा जी हैं, अर्जुन जी हैं, राजपाल जी हैं, शर्मा जी हैं, सब मेरे से संबंधित हैं इसमें. जब मैं गुरु बन के आता हूँ तब तुम मेरे शिष्य बन के आते हो, मेरे डिसाइपल बन के आते हो.
Technically speaking, he was referring to a previous birth when he had met some of us the last time around. A being like him must have been around from the Satyug or the Yug that came after that at most. 500 years ago, he took birth as an established Siddh Guru with the purpose of taking his disciples further north. He met others a couple of 100 years ago, and that story follows later. But before that, we need to hear from Puranji. who lived and performed seva at Gurudev's home Kamsthan for more than a decade. According to you, are most of his disciples who came to meet him in this life, are they all connected to him from the past? Is that your opinion?
Yes.
Tell us anything you might be able to add to that.
Gurudev said, Gurudev कहते मुझे 500 साल है तुम सबको इकट्ठा करने के लिए. To be 500 ways to connect all you here in this birth. There is past connection, तभी तो इकट्ठा किया ना.
And collect he did from different corners of the world by manipulating circumstances under the cloak of coincidence. The man named Santlal came to life in the second half of his existence in this life. The first half, though, was much ado about nothing. He was a government servant with power, connections, and arrogance. Did he qualify to be a disciple? Certainly not. Did he become an exemplary one? He certainly did.
पंजाब में एक गंगोवाल है
जी.
वहाँ मुझे किसी ने बताया कि एक साधु है जो बहुत ज्ञानी ध्यानी है, ये है वो है. मैं वहाँ चला गया. जब मेरा नंबर आया तो उसने कहा कि आप कल आइए. बड़ा डिसअपॉइंटेड था कि सारा दिन तो खड़े रहे. मैंने कहा जी आप किसी सेवादार को बोल दीजिए जितने बजे आप कहते मैं उतने बजे वहाँ आ जाऊँगा, वो मुझे अंदर दे. कहते मैं बोल दूँ. मैंने सोचा बेवकूफ़ तो बना ही रहा है, चल पर कहना मानना भी ज़रूरी है. दूसरे दिन जब पहुंचा, किसी ने मुझे कोई हेल्प नहीं की वहाँ पहुंचने तक, विदाउट लाइन. फिर लाइन में पहुंचा, मुझे कहते आप कल आओ. चौथे दिन जब गया तो उसने फिर कह दिया कल आओ. तो धर्मशाला में ठहरा हुआ था मैं, होटल में. तो एक्चुअली उस समय इतना रिवाज भी नहीं था हमारे जैसे लोगों का कि जहाँ जाओ धर्मशाला ढूंढो वहाँ रहेगा. ये थी कहानी. तो मैं चौथे दिन के बाद पांचवें दिन गया हूँ तो उसने मुझे यही कहा कि मैंने बहुत कोशिश की है आपको अपनाने की, तो आपका लिंक कहीं और है, तो मुझे इजाज़त नहीं मिली, मैं आपको नहीं अपना सकता. मैंने कहा जी मेरा लिंक किसके साथ है? कहते जिसके साथ लिंक है वो भी यहाँ आया.
ओह वाह.
मैं कहा जी मिलवा दो फिर. कहता नहीं टाइम आएगा, इन चीज़ों का टाइम होता है, टाइम आएगा अपने आप मिल जाएंगे.
It took a decade and a half for Santlal ji to finally meet his guru. He went to Gurgaon with some of his acquaintances who took him to meet Gurudev. What he saw was not a great optic. He saw a very simple, good-looking man dressed in a lungi sitting on the floor. His acquaintances did a dandavat pranam, and Santlal ji was left standing. His story continues.
मुझे याद है कि हम 12 बजे मिले थे गुरु जी.
अच्छा.
वेरी सिंपल, धोती बंधी हुई थी और बैठे थे नीचे गेट के पास, नीचे बैठे. ये कैसे रियली मैंने ये सोचा. इन्होंने तो खूब दंडवत प्रणाम किए. मैंने हाथ जोड़कर नमस्ते की. मैंने कहा जी मैंने आपसे कुछ प्राइवेट बात करनी. अब मुझे विश्वास नहीं हुआ कि भाई वेरी सिंपल और ये गुरु जी हो सकते हैं. तो मैंने उनको कहा जी 1960 में आप कहीं पंजाब में गंगोवाल गए थे?
हाँ जी.
तो उन्होंने कहा हाँ. आप किससे मिले थे? उन्होंने बताया, उनका डिस्क्रिप्शन भी दिया मुझे.
ओ साधु जी का. ओके.
क्योंकि उसने मुझे कहा था ना जिनके साथ तेरा लिंक है वो आया हुआ है. तब गुरु जी ने कहा था कि बेटे बच्चे कहाँ ढूंढ सकते हैं गुरु को, गुरु ही अपने बच्चों को ढूंढता है. मैंने सिंपल पूछा था गुरु जी से, तो उन्होंने ये बोला था कि तू 9 जन्म से मेरे पास है.
Most celebrities remain popular for a few decades. Kings and queens are known for a few thousand years at most. But Narinder ji, his wife Saroj, and his brother Virinder ji have been written about tens of thousands of years ago in the Bhrigu Samhita. Their claim to fame definitely is thousands and thousands of years in antiquity. Let's talk to Sarojji and her husband next.
मैं बीमार थी ना 83-84 में जब हम फर्स्ट टाइम गुरुजी के पास आए तो उन्होंने मुझे लौंग दी मरक्का के बीच में डाल के काली मिर्च तो सुबह मैं बिल्कुल ठीक थी तो तब मुझे विश्वास ही नहीं हो रहा था कि मैं एकदम से ऐसे ठीक होगी। उसके बाद बहुत सारी ऐसी बातें थी। एक बार ये बीमार थे तब मैं गुरुजी के पास आई तो मैंने एंटर किया तो मैं रोई एकदम से कि गुरुजी कहते की हो या पुत्र गुरुजी बीमार है कहते वो ठीक है बिल्कुल। तो मैं जब घर गई तो बिल्कुल ठीक थी बीमार नहीं कुछ नहीं थे।
मैं एक बात जरूर कहना चाहूँगा गुरुजी के पास जब हम गए फॉर द फर्स्ट टाइम 1983 के 16 अगस्त था तो गुरुजी ने कुछ नहीं कहा आओ पुत्र। हमें बड़ी खुशी हुई हमें देखकर लगा कि ना जाने हम इनको कितनी बार पहले मिल चुके हैं जबकि हम फॉर द फर्स्ट टाइम मिल रहे थे। मतलब उनकी पर्सनैलिटी में इतनी जबरदस्त अट्रैक्शन थी कि ऐसा लगता था कि ना जाने हम कब से इनको जानते हैं।
Many of his disciples weren't too keen on meeting him initially. It hurt our intelligence to think that a man who people claimed was a guru could change our destinies, alter our lives, cure us or our kith and kin. Most times we had to be cajoled into going to meet him. Once we did, we were enveloped by his influence. I remember a famous doha, लाली मेरे लाल की जिथ देखूं तिथ लाल, लाली देखन मैं गई ते मैं भी हो गई लाल. The poet Kabir says that when he saw the greatness of the master, he was colored by the greatness that made him great as well. Lal Saab's entry to the sthan was different to most. He had no problems to solve. In fact, he was amused by the concept of Guruji and paid the price with patience.
I was an average Canadian living there since 1973. I was average Canadian drinking beer, having parties and all that. And once in a while I used to go to temple. I met a person there who said, my Guruji is coming. I said, okay, give me your phone number and your address. Anyhow, I had to go see somebody off at the airport. His house was on his way and I found out that he was visiting Toronto. He's already here. So I knocked the door, nobody at home. I phoned them and he said, we are not home, but we'll come back tomorrow. So I went there next day. There were a lot of people in Toronto, and being in Toronto, a lot of people there. So I waited. People came and gone. In the evening, I was told, come back the next day. So okay. So I called my work. I said, I'm sick. I'm not coming. So I went there next day. Same thing. Morning, evening, I'm still there. I said, come back the next day. It's the third day. So morning, evening. Now, if I tell you something, I laughed and you're going to laugh. At about 6 o'clock in the evening, somebody comes to me, he says, Guruji sent this tea for you. So I looked at the cup, half a cup of tea. I said, half a cup of tea? Somebody drank a tea and he gives it to me. Anyhow, I don't know what made me do it. I drank it. About 7:30 in the evening, he calls me in. I'm the last person to go up. Aur putra, ki chahiye? Nothing. Aap to seva kariyo. I had no idea what the seva was. Okay, Guruji, theek hai ji. I'll do seva.
What Gurudev had sent for Lal Saab was half a cup of tea that he had sipped, and through the tea shared with Lal Saab a set of qualities, his gunas and spiritual power.
I came to New Delhi later in 80s. So I went to Gurgaon, same thing repeated. In the morning, 9 o'clock there, 9 o'clock at night, people going in, I'm waiting outside. They told me to come back tomorrow. I said, okay, no problem. I'll come back tomorrow. Same thing. 9 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock at night, people gone in, I'm still waiting. Third day, same thing. At 9 o'clock at night, he called me, Putra aa gaya? Just like he didn't even know I was outside. Haji aa gaya. 5 seconds. Beta, come back on 1st of January. Teri mata swere 6:15 baje jyot karegi. So I went to sites to Vaishno Devi. Made sure that I get to Gurgaon at 6:15 in the morning. So I got here and I came for 3 weeks. First time. I stayed for 5 months.
Lal Sahab does not know that before Gurudev left for Toronto, he told me, "Beta, I want to go to Toronto and give seva to someone there. What do you think?" Naturally, I said, "Gurudev, what a wonderful idea." So Gurudev had already selected the man before he even reached Toronto. And before that man even met him. What happened thereafter was a test of faith. And if Lal Sahab had not waited, or if Lal Sahab had not been patient, he wouldn't have got this opportunity to become the saint that he now is. Like Lal Sahab, Gurudev's disciples landed up under one excuse or another as destiny had programmed them coming together. Sometimes their family members or friends came earlier and helped them connect to the mahaguru. Sometimes these collections happened in groups. Gurudev's office was where he found his first set of disciples, over half a dozen co-workers who joined him in the mission of uplifting humanity. These included people like R.C. Malhotra ji, F.C. Sharma ji, R.P. Sharma ji, Bade Jain Sahab, Dr. Shankar Narayan, as well as Datta ji, who broke ground in Calcutta. One of the most significant members of Gurudev's spiritual pyramid was his primary disciple Sri R.C. Malhotra ji, who happened to be his colleague at work. Gurudev's experiments on how to become a perfect guru started with him. Malhotra ji recalls how difficult it was for him to accept his friend as his guru.
मेरे बहुत गहरे दोस्त थे। गुरु बनाना बड़ा आसान है, दोस्त गुरु बनाना बड़ा मुश्किल है, बहुत मुश्किल है।
Malhotra ji was a man with a naughty streak, but a golden heart. He enjoyed being four-lettered by Gurudev. His sincerity had no equal. He dedicated his life to his Guru first, and thereafter to the followers and devotees who loved him dearly. He remained a bachelor till the end of his life, 60% of which was spent on seva and the administration of the sthan. He established the sthan at Nasavgarh, which was attached to Gurudev's Samadhi, where thousands of people came to seek grace. Gurudev's daughter Renu recalls humorously the story of Malhotra ji's beginnings shared by Malhotra ji himself. A precursor to how a man who was scared of ghosts became a spiritual powerhouse whom every ghost was scared of.
मुझे भूतों से डर लगता था। कहते मैं इसलिए टूर का भी काम नहीं लेता था। ये जाते थे जंगलों में, क्योंकि वहाँ जंगल होते हैं, गेस्ट हाउस मिलते नहीं थे। तो कहते मुझे डर लगता था कि जंगल में इतने सुनसान में रहना मेरे बस की बात नहीं थी, कि भूत आ जाए, कुछ हो जाए। तो कहते ये हमेशा एक बार कहते मेरी ड्यूटी लगा दी उन्होंने, आ जाना वहाँ मल्होत्रा, बहुत अच्छा, मैं कोई बात नहीं, कुछ डर वर। कहते नहीं मुझे डर। कहते मैं एक बार गया और इन्होंने अपना पाठ कर रहे ऐसे करके, कहते तब मुझे लगा कि ये कुछ करते हैं, ये ऐसे ही नहीं बोलते, कि ये ऐसे बैठ के चादर लपेट ली ऊपर। कहते मैंने कहा भैया ये तुम जैसे बैठ गए हो, पहले तो मुझे तुम्हें ही देख के डर लग रहा है। तो कहते मुझे इन्होंने पाठ पता नहीं कौन सा बताया था पापा जी ने, क्योंकि हम तो मजाक में ही सुन रहे थे सारी चीज। तो कहते पाठ दिया और पापा जी कहते मैं फंस गया। अब बस पाठ दे दिया, भूत का डर तो खत्म हो गया, और बाकी जो डर समेट में आए इतने, वो गुरु का डर बैठा दिया।
The fear of ghosts get converted into the fear of the Guru. That's a good one if I've ever heard one. At one of these camps, Gurudev took Malhotra ji into a forest to give him a demonstration of the power of the Chamunda mantra. Malhotra ji saw a few figures in white approaching. He turned frantically in Gurudev's direction, only to find that Gurudev was nowhere to be seen. So where had Gurudev gone? Gurudev had hidden behind a tree, leaving Malhotra ji feeling all alone. Then Malhotra ji started chanting the Chamunda mantra, and as he did, the figures retreated. When Gurudev appeared, he made Malhotra ji realize how the power of the mantra had worked and acted as a protection or a kavach. Unbelievable but true, Malhotra ji had almost no conscious recollection of his past lives where he had already reached sainthood. Receiving power from Gurudev initially was like receiving a new gizmo, and he played with those powers like any other kid would. On one occasion, Malhotra ji inquired about the price of fruit from a vendor. The vendor was rude and asked why he wanted to know the price since he never bought any fruit. Angered by this, Malhotra ji willed a bull standing close by to attack the fruit cart and overturn it. He succeeded with the bull's horns, but failed in Gurudev's eyes. On more than one occasion, he experimented and succeeded in delaying the train he used to commute by because he was late. Let's not forget his leg pulling of Santosh ji from Nadon. The simple Simon met a pieman, remember? He made Santosh ji believe that the mantra he was doing was most effective when reciting it sitting on a bull facing its tail. His sense of naughty humor inspired many by making them digest spiritualism easier. His initiation was the most unique. Here's an account of it by Ravi Trehan.
Talking about Gurudev's spiritual powers and his control over nature, I recall a very interesting incident. Shri R.C. Malhotra ji, who was his first and the prime Shishya, they worked in the same office and they were more like friends. But then, having been in the company of a spiritual master, Malhotra ji said, whom he had so far regarded as an intimate friend, he was slowly drawn into the spiritual way of life. Sometime in 1971, standing in the waters of Holy Ganga at Haridwar, he was initiated and formally became Gurudev's Shishya. He said during his initiation ceremony, he had an awe-inspiring experience. Revered Guruji was standing in the water of Holy Ganga and there was a strong current. Guruji asked him to lie down horizontally in the water in a posture that his head touched Guruji's feet. It was a Dandavat Pranam. Malhotra ji said he hesitated because the water current was too strong and he did not know how to swim. At that point of time, Guruji commanded to follow his instructions, and he said to his utter surprise, the gushing waters of Ganga became still and he obeyed his command and the initiation ceremony was performed. Overawed by this happening, Malhotra ji ventured to ask Guruji, how come the gushing waters of Ganga came to stand still for a while? Very calmly he replied that these objects of nature were under his control.
I thought it would be nice for you to hear this from the horse's mouth. I was lucky enough to find one of Malhotra ji's old recordings in an old phone. I have taken an excerpt from it and placed it right in the middle of Ravi Trehan ji's interview because it refers to the same incident of Gurudev appointing him his disciple in the holy waters of Ganga and how the river became still for a few minutes.
जब मुझे शिष्य बनाया, वो शिष्य का बनाया जो आगे हरिद्वार बना शिष्य
गंगा के नीचे
तो
पानी ठहर गया
चला हो गया फिर मुंह में पानी भरा घूंट और इशारे के पहले बता दिया कि मैं ऐसा करूंगा और ठोकूंगा तो उन्हें पी जाना है तूने पी तो मन बता सी कोई नफरत पैदा नहीं होनी चाहिए तो फिर वो मैंने किया इशारा किया वैसे किया वो डाला मैं पीता चला गया जब वो छाती से लगाया फिर ये उतार के मेरे हाथ में डाल दिया.
The Guru gives his disciple Charna Amrit under the waters and then takes out his own kada, given to him by Buddhe Baba, and puts it on Malhotra ji's hand, making him his first disciple. Back to Ravi Trehan.
Soon after that, he had the proud privilege of having darshan of almost all symbols that appeared one after the other in Gurudev's hands and on his body. He had Om, Jyoti, Shivlinga, Trishul, crescent moon, Padam, Ganapati, Nandi, and 3 pindis of Ma Vaishno Devi. And Malhotraji says he was completely overawed. Later on, quite a few Shishyas and many persons from the public also had the proud privilege of having darshan of some of these divine symbols from time to time.
In the later years, after Malhotraji had run the gauntlet of fire and improved his attitudes and guna mix, he learned to deal with the powers bestowed upon him. He eventually assisted Gurudev in the mentorship of the newer entrants in Gurudev's Saint Manufacturing Factory. Malhotraji, who was fondly called Papaji, later came to be known as Chote Guruji. He justified this title till his dying day. After Gurudev and his wife Mataji's demise, Malhotraji led the institution and held the fort. Khar Gymkhana in Mumbai became another sourcing space for future saints, where many of us, his to-be devotees and disciples, became friends while playing table tennis. When Gurudev visited the city, we went to meet him, and most of us were drawn into his fold. After that, table tennis took a break. One of the table tennis players was Pradeep Sethi. His uncle Yash was the reason why Gurudev had first come to Mumbai. His cure at Gurudev's hands had sent shock waves through the medical community, as they had predicted that there was no chance of survival. Pradeep sheds more light.
Pradeep, you had an uncle who was very, very sick. Suddenly, one bright morning, I discovered that from almost being dead, he was almost fine. Tell me the story.
This started when my uncle gradually diagnosed that he's suffering from a disease known as dermatomyositis, which is a weakening of the muscles. But my father was always very shaken. He was shaken. For hours in this glucose, and hours he used to, in the morning and evening, sit at a small house temple which was made and pray. One day, a very phenomenal thing happened in the evening when we reached the hospital. There was a message, please come and meet the doctor at his chamber. Dr. Singhal said, but whatever in the science, he has done all the possibilities, but in spite of that, his position is deteriorating, and his maximum span of life left is a couple of months. It's better you take him back to your home. Eventually, the next day we took him back, and in the coming few months, my house was regularly visited by various saints, but still his position was deteriorating. One of our uncles staying in Nagpur, one day he called up my father saying that there is a gentleman who has come here who is wearing a pant and shirt and staying in a tent working with the government of India, and a lot of people are going to him. He gives them jal, and should I go? So my father said, why not? Try it out. So the next day in the morning he went, and our Gurudev refused to meet him. Made him wait for a couple of hours. Next day he called him again. When he called him, he said, I know the purpose of your visit. You have come for your brother who's seriously ill in Bombay. But at this stage, I can't do anything. He bowed out and started crying. He should have decided that he finally agreed to come to Bombay. But the fact is, very important, the fact is that a week earlier he had already told his colleagues that get ready, we have to go to Bombay. Maybe he was testing my uncle. This was my first decision of mine. Liked him in the first instance, but never believed that he had extraordinary powers at that juncture. Came to our house, stayed there for a week, gave a commitment and an assurance that our uncle will be all right. He started seva for the first time in Bombay and gradually gave seva to my father also. And in this process of 6 months, he started seeing changes in my uncle. The stage where he could not move any limb, any part of his body, and his neck stooped down. Gradually, the changes were visible. In this process, weekly sevas over at our house. A lot of people used to come and get cured.
How did he treat your uncle? With what type of cure?
Yeah, he used to give him jal. He gave him a lot of mantras, which he told him to endlessly recite within. I think that was the basic curing method. And his spiritual healing, his touch of his hand, putting his head on his forehead, putting his head on the body parts which were affected.
I had seen Yash in his worst condition when I visited the Sethi household years before, when they had called some Baba or the other to cure him. It did not work. I accidentally met Sandeep, one of the brothers, who invited me to get help from the person who was treating Yash. I went over hoping to get a cure for my arthritis, but found no cure. A year later, when I met Sandeep once again at the airport, he told me that his brother was much better. I was shocked and I went to visit them. It was Yash, a person who had almost died, who opened the door and led me up the stairs to the first floor. All that remained of his acute condition from a year earlier was a limp. For Gurudev, finding monks in cream-colored togas was like a treasure hunt. The search button probably consumed a large part of his spiritual bandwidth. The Himachalis were the easiest to enfold, as were those from Punjab and other parts of North India. The hardest to tame were those who came from Mumbai. Most of us were agnostic and did not find the subject of spiritualism interesting or even digestible. Thank God he did not charge a fee for mentorship. Otherwise, most of us Mumbaikars would have had to pay a huge premium. Even though Gurudev cured me of an incurable disease in less than 1 minute, I did not acquire faith. But 5 years later, events far stranger than fiction helped me bite the bullet. Even though my cure at Gurudev's hands was corroborated by a healer who treated me using jewel therapy under the guidance of his guru, whom he could communicate with through a planchette, my intellect refused to accept what had happened to me. I kept trying to find reasons to believe that it was a case of hypnosis. I even did a course in hypnotherapy to try and validate my suspicions, but no success. 5 years later, I was in Africa, and every time I wanted to participate in some disallowable adventures, an invisible hand would block my path. This happened over 6 times, and every time I was stopped from going immoral, the kada or bracelet that Gurudev had made me wear years earlier would flash in my inner eye. Even though I knew this was bizarre, the coincidences were far too frequent for me to dismiss. I realized it was Gurudev's handiwork and that he had psychologically browbeaten me into faith. So, some came easy, some came tough. Some just slid into the fray. The Mahaguru's collection center was a success story where most of his past disciples and devotees got accommodated. Not only that, but some of his magic rubbed off on the downlines. And today, we are a team that is eternally grateful to him and in reflected glory of ourselves. And we even know how to say this in Urdu poetry. मैं अकेला ही चला था जानिबे मंजिल मगर मैं अकेला ही चला था जानिबे मंजिल मगर लोग साथ आते गए और कारवां बनता गया